I'd say that Call of Duty is kind of like the Doctor Who of video games. Now I don't mean to insult Doctor Who fans, but what I mean by that is that it's a long-running series that's had multiple iterations, all based around a similar theme. The series originally started out focusing on World War II, and all things considered, the early games were pretty damn good, and they still hold up. When Infinity Ward released Modern Warfare in 2007, it kind of turned the series on its head, as the Second World War had really become its own genre by that point, and now they'd brought the series into a more contemporary setting. In 2009, Infinity Ward followed up with a sequel, Modern Warfare 2, which was released for every major platform at the time. And I can't remember any other video game creating such a buzz around fans up until its release. I can still remember attending the midnight launch at EB Games with my friend and looking around and seeing all manner of different looking people waiting diligently in line. What was most strange was that half the people waiting around weren't the type of people you'd think were into gaming, but that's the effect this game had on everyone, which I attribute mostly to the multiplayer mode. So what was the deal? What was it that made this game so hyped up and eagerly anticipated? And more importantly, was it worth the wait? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let's just find out then, shall we? Now, it's true that the Call of Duty games are mostly played for their multiplayer component, and that's fair enough. But there's always been a very strong single-player campaign on offer here as well. The only real problem with the single-player campaign has always been the length. They've always been anywhere from 4 to 6 hours long, and to say that they usually just reuse the same kind of setups over and over is a bit of an understatement. But the campaign in Modern Warfare 2 still really did manage to surprise everyone with what it had on offer.
Get down! Get down!
So after the events of the first game, the death of Imran Zakhaev has turned him into something of a martyr, with the Russian ultranationalists taking control of Russia and the world on the brink of war. Modern war, if you will. As was pretty standard for the series back then, the campaign kinda jumps all over the place as you swap from character to character and location to location. One mission you're in Asia, then you're back in the United States in large-scale gunfights in Washington DC before heading to Russia for a high-octane shootout in a gulag. It's cool stuff. It seems like there's scripted sequences every 5 seconds, as hell is pretty much constantly breaking loose, and the amount of time and effort that must have gone into creating and designing these types of moments is just unthinkable. You really feel like you're in this huge blockbuster film and almost everything in the environment either explodes or shoots at you. It can be a bit overwhelming at times, like I find myself often needing to take a break and get a breath of fresh air, as it's this almost visceral assault on your senses at times. But it is directly contrasted with certain missions where things are a lot slower and you're not constantly being shot at. One of the most controversial moments in the entire game, and something that didn't really receive all that much negative attention, surprisingly, is a mission called No Russian. Without giving too much away, in this one you're playing the role of a character very pivotal to the main story, who's basically walking through an airport gunning down a couple hundred innocent people with a group of terrorists. I know there's a lot of edgelords out there who like to pretend like this mission doesn't faze them, but it has to be said that the whole thing is kinda fucked up. It seems every time I've played this, I've noticed something different, like how you can see injured civilians crawling across the ground as they bleed out, or other civilians holding their hands up in surrender as if that's gonna save them. They really went above and beyond, throwing you into the shoes of this murderous gunman, making sure that everyone at the airport is really gonna have a bad day. I think my favourite mission is the one set in the Gulag, where you're ambushed in the showers by guards with riot shields and have to blast your way out. It's utterly badass. Like all of the COD games before it, and well, everything since, Modern Warfare 2 runs in the Infinity Ward engine, which as most people know is a heavily modified version of the Quake 3 engine. And I think all things considered, this is still a damn good looking game, even by today's standards. The textures almost across the board are just fantastic. They're really nice, sharp and crisp, and there's lots of objects in the game world making everything seem more believable. There's a few missions where you're in the US where the whole place has been turned into a war zone, and some of these sections are just incredible. You really feel like you're in this world that's just gone to shit. The weapons, of which there are many, all look great, they sound great, and Stephen Barton and Harry Gregson Williams returned to compose the game's soundtrack, which is the kind of over-the-top cinematic stuff we've come to expect. Despite how uninspired it can seem at times, this really is a campaign with a lot of polish that's gripping from start to finish. So about now you're thinking, alright dickhead, what's wrong with the campaign? Well, to be honest, there's nothing all that much wrong with it. I mean, it's pretty solid at what it does. I guess the length could be a complaint, but it doesn't feel like it ends prematurely, and it tells the story it wants to tell, ending on a pretty cool cliffhanger. It does go off the basis that you've played and have a pretty solid understanding and recollection of the events in the first game as well. I guess one issue with the campaign is that once you've finished it, there's not really any reason to go back and play it again. I really think playing the COD games on the hardest difficulty is one of the best examples of artificial difficulty in a game, and there's nothing fun about popping out of cover for 2 seconds before hiding for 5 seconds to let your health recharge, and then constantly avoiding grenades that land at your feet. But what really made Modern Warfare 2 huge at the time of its release was the multiplayer, and what most undoubtedly bought the game for. Now, like the first game, this was all about creating your own class, playing modes like Team Deathmatch and Domination, and then spending hundreds of hours leveling up and unlocking weapons, perks, skins, and all that kind of shit. And I'd love to talk about this mode, I really would, but the problem is that no one's playing it. I've tried finding matches for Team Deathmatch on 3 separate times of the day, on the weekends and all that, and I can never find a suitable match to join. I just sat there in the matchmaking screen and nothing happens. I guess we can talk about the Spec Ops though, which is a co-op mode where you and a buddy take on a series of quick missions, most of which are sequences recycled from the campaign. You get a score from 1 to 3 stars, which is dependent on the difficulty you're playing at and often your overall performance. The more stars you earn, the more missions you unlock, with each mission getting progressively more difficult. Now, some of these missions are fun to play. There's a couple where one player is in control of a minigun or an AC-130 gunship covering the other player on foot, which require actual teamwork to finish. But most of them are just, as I said, sequences from the main campaign with a second player added in. It's just 2 people running around shooting things over and over. In co-op, you're able to revive players who take too much damage, which also makes certain levels a lot more forgiving. But I just think a lot of them are trial and error, and during those missions where you have to kill a preset amount of enemies, it's often a matter of learning where they spawn from, which again just comes from replaying the mission over and over.
You did it! You got those 2 stars, Sonny Jim.
I've always looked at Modern Warfare 2 as the kind of turning point where FPS games really took a bit of a nosedive. By this point, most shooting games had adopted the whole regenerating health mechanic, but I think the way this game really affected the industry was the multiplayer component. It just seemed that from like this point on, it was mandatory or something that every first-person shooter had to have some sort of tacked-on multiplayer mode, with a ranked leveling system, perks, unlockables, all that stuff. It was like developers had seen the success of Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer mode and all just tried to follow suit. I don't think this makes Modern Warfare 2 a bad game, it's just a really good example of one of the key turning points in the industry, where it just seemed that everyone seemed to lose their creative buzz. At this point, I think the only real reason to play this game is if you're working your way through the series. The multiplayer is largely dead depending on which part of the world you're living in, and Spec Ops really requires a second person to experience the whole thing properly. There is still a good single player campaign on offer here though, but after you've finished that, there's very little reason to stay enlisted.
He's gonna get away! Bravo 6, we've got the package. I repeat, we have got the package.